Grab some popcorn, turn off the lights, and make sure your doors are locked. Because what you're about to hear is real, disturbing, and might be closer than you think. Welcome to Frozen Clues, where every case reveals the darkest corners of the human mind. Are you ready to dive into the mystery? Then let's begin. What if I told you that a simple elevator ride could become one of the most haunting pieces of evidence in a missing person case? What if that same elevator footage would be watched by millions of people worldwide, all trying to solve a mystery that continues to baffle investigators to this day? This is the story of Elisa Lam, a 21-year-old Canadian student whose disappearance at a notorious Los Angeles hotel would become one of the most discussed cases in recent memory. A case that begins with dreams of adventure and ends with questions that may never be fully answered. But before we dive into what happened in those final days of January 2013, let me tell you about Elisa herself. She was a bright, creative young woman from Vancouver, studying at the University of British Columbia. Those who knew her described her as intelligent, artistic, and someone who loved to explore the world around her. She had dreams, aspirations, and a whole life ahead of her. In January 2013, Elisa decided to embark on a solo trip along the west coast of the United States. This wasn't unusual for her. She was independent, adventurous, and had traveled alone before. Her itinerary included stops in San Diego and Los Angeles before she planned to head up to Santa Cruz. It was meant to be a journey of self-discovery, a chance to see new places and experience life on her own terms. But here's where our story takes its first dark turn. Of all the places Elisa could have chosen to stay in Los Angeles, she ended up at the Cecil Hotel. Now, if you've never heard of the Cecil Hotel, let me paint you a picture of this place, because understanding the hotel's history is crucial to understanding what happened next. The Cecil Hotel opened its doors in 1927, during the height of the Jazz Age. It was built to be a respectable business hotel in downtown Los Angeles, designed to house visitors and businessmen in what was then a thriving part of the city. The building itself is imposing, 14 stories of brick and stone, with an architecture that speaks to grander times. But as the decades passed, the area around the Cecil began to change. By the 1950s and 60s, downtown Los Angeles had started its decline. The neighborhood became rougher, more dangerous. The Cecil's clientele changed too, from businessmen and tourists to long-term residents, many of whom were struggling with poverty, addiction, and mental health issues. What made the Cecil truly notorious, however, wasn't just its location or its deteriorating conditions. It was the sheer number of tragic incidents that occurred within its walls. We're talking about suicides, murders, overdoses, an almost unbelievable catalog of human tragedy. Some of the most infamous cases include the unsolved murder of Elizabeth Short, known as the Black Dahlia, who was allegedly seen at the Cecil shortly before her death in 1947. Then there was Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker serial killer, who actually lived at the Cecil during his killing spree in the 1980s. Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger stayed there in 1991 while allegedly committing murders in the Los Angeles area. The list goes on and on. By 2013, when Elisa arrived, the Cecil had earned a reputation as one of the most haunted and dangerous hotels in America. The question that haunts everyone who learns about this case is, why would a young, intelligent woman choose to stay in such a place? The answer might be simpler than you think. Elisa was a budget-conscious college student, and the Cecil offered cheap accommodation in downtown LA. Online reviews and booking sites may not have fully conveyed the hotel's dark reputation. She might have simply seen it as an affordable option. In her chosen travel destination, Elisa checked into the Cecil Hotel on January 26, 2013. She was initially assigned to a shared dormitory-style room. which was common for budget travelers. But according to hotel records, she was moved to a private room after just a few days. The official reason given was that her roommates had complained about her behavior. They said she was acting strangely, making them uncomfortable. What kind of strange behavior are we talking about? The details are somewhat unclear, but reports suggest that Elisa was acting erratically, possibly talking to herself, and generally making her roommates feel uneasy. This detail becomes important later, as it suggests that something was already wrong before Elisa's disappearance. For the first few days of her stay, Elisa maintained contact with her family back in Vancouver. She called her parents regularly, posted on social media, and seemed to be enjoying her trip. Her Tumblr blog, which she had been keeping during her travels, showed photos and thoughts from her journey. Everything appeared normal from the outside. But then, on January 31st, 2013, something changed. Elisa was supposed to check out of the hotel that day and continue her journey to Santa Cruz. She had already purchased a bus ticket and had made plans to meet friends there. Her parents were expecting her usual daily call. The call never came. When Elisa failed to contact her family on January 31st, her parents immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't like their daughter. She was responsible, reliable, and always kept in touch during her travels. They had spoken to her just the day before, and she had seemed fine. Excited about the next leg of her journey, the Lam family contacted the Los Angeles Police Department, and missing person protocols were immediately put into action. The officers arrived at the Cecil Hotel and began their investigation. They questioned hotel staff, examined Elisa's room, and started piecing together her final known movements. What they discovered was troubling. Hotel employees reported that they had seen Elisa acting strangely in the days leading up to her disappearance. She had been seen talking to herself in the lobby, pressing multiple elevator buttons, and generally behaving in ways that concerned staff members. Some employees mentioned that she seemed paranoid, as if she thought she was being followed. The police conducted an initial search of the hotel, checking common areas, stairwells, and even some of the restricted areas. They found no trace of Elisa. Her personal belongings were still in her room, including her laptop, clothing, and identification. The only thing missing was Elisa herself. As the investigation continued, detectives began to focus on the hotel's security camera system. The Cecil, despite its reputation, did have surveillance cameras in key areas, including the elevators. And it was here that investigators would find something that would change everything about this case. On February 13th, nearly 2 weeks after Elisa's disappearance, the LAPD made a decision that would thrust this case into the international spotlight. They released footage from one of the hotel's elevator cameras, hoping that someone might recognize Elisa or have information about her whereabouts. The footage was time-stamped January 31st, the day Elisa disappeared. What it showed was 4 minutes of Elisa inside one of the Cecil's elevators, and her behavior in that elevator would become the subject of endless speculation and analysis. Let me describe what you would see if you watched this footage. The video begins with Elisa entering the elevator. She appears to press multiple buttons on the panel, far more buttons than necessary for someone simply trying to reach a specific floor. She then steps back and waits, but the elevator doors don't close. After a moment, Elisa steps forward and peers out of the elevator, looking left and right down the hallway, as if checking to see if someone is there. She then steps back into the elevator and moves to the side, positioning herself against the wall, where she wouldn't be visible to someone looking in from the hallway. The doors still don't close. Elisa waits, then steps out of the elevator entirely, standing in the hallway. She appears to be talking to someone, but there's no one visible in the camera's view. Her gestures are animated, as if she's having a conversation, or perhaps an argument. Then comes the part of the footage that people find most disturbing. Elisa begins moving her hands in ways that many viewers had described as bizarre or unnatural. She appears to be counting on her fingers, making hand gestures that some interpret as ritualistic or supernatural. Her movements become increasingly erratic. She steps back into the elevator, presses more buttons, and exits again. At one point, she appears to hide against the wall outside the elevator, as if she's trying to avoid being seen by someone. The entire time, the elevator doors remain open, which is unusual. Most elevators are programmed to close after a certain period. The footage ends with Elisa walking away from the elevator, disappearing from view. She would never be seen alive. Again, when this elevator footage was released to the public, it went viral almost immediately. Millions of people watched it, and everyone seemed to have a theory about what they were seeing. Some believed Elisa was running from someone. A stalker, an attacker, someone who meant her harm. Others thought her behavior suggested she was experiencing a mental health crisis or was under the influence of drugs. But there were also those who believed something supernatural was happening. They pointed to her hand movements, her apparent conversation with an invisible person, and the fact that the elevator doors never closed as evidence of paranormal activity. These theories were fueled by the Cecil Hotel's dark reputation and history of unexplained deaths. The internet became obsessed with solving the case of Elisa Lam. Amateur detectives analyzed every frame of the footage, enhanced the audio hoping to hear what she might have been saying, and developed elaborate theories about what had happened to her. The case became a phenomenon, discussed on forums, social media, and true crime communities worldwide. But while the internet was busy speculating, the real investigation continued. Police expanded their search of the hotel, brought in additional resources, and interviewed hundreds of people. They checked local hospitals, morgues, and even contacted law enforcement agencies in other cities in case Elisa had somehow left Los Angeles. For over 2 weeks, there was no trace of her. Her family offered a reward for information, and the media coverage intensified. Elisa's face was on missing person posters throughout Los Angeles, and her story was being covered by news outlets around the world. And then, on February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa's disappearance, there was a discovery that would shock everyone involved in the case. Hotel guests had been complaining about problems with the water supply. Some reported that the water pressure was low. Others said the water tasted strange or had an unusual color. The hotel's maintenance staff decided to investigate, and they headed up to the roof to check the water tanks. What they found there would answer some questions about Elisa's fate, but it would also raise many more. The Cecil Hotel had 4 large water tanks on its roof, each one designed to supply water to the entire 14-story building. These tanks were massive, approximately 8 feet tall and 4 feet in diameter, and they were supposed to be securely covered and inaccessible to the general public. When the maintenance worker climbed up to inspect the tanks, he made a discovery that would forever change how people viewed this case. Inside one of the water tanks, he found the body of Elisa Lam. The news sent shockwaves through the investigation, the media, and the online communities that had been following the case. After nearly 3 weeks of searching, Elisa had been found, in perhaps the last place anyone would have thought to look, inside the hotel's water supply system. But the discovery of Elisa's body only deepened the mystery. How had she gotten into the water tank? The tanks were located on the roof of the building, an area that was supposed to be restricted to hotel employees only. To access the roof, someone would need to go through a locked door, climb a ladder, and then somehow lift the heavy lid of the water tank. The logistics seemed almost impossible for someone to accomplish alone, especially someone of Elisa's small stature. The tank lid was heavy, and getting into the tank would have required significant physical effort. This led many people to question whether Elisa could have done this by herself, or whether someone else was involved. The Los Angeles Police Department treated the scene as a potential crime scene, bringing in forensic experts and conducting a thorough investigation of the roof area. They examined the water tanks, looking for any evidence of foul play, fingerprints, DNA, signs of a struggle, anything that might indicate what had happened. What they found was puzzling. There were no obvious signs of trauma to Elisa's body, no evidence of a struggle on the roof, and no clear indication that anyone else had been involved. The tank lid, while heavy, was not impossible for someone to move if they were determined to do so. The autopsy results, when they were finally released, provided some answers, but also raised new questions. The medical examiner determined that Elisa had drowned and that there were no signs of physical trauma that would suggest she had been attacked or murdered. Toxicology tests showed that she had not been drinking alcohol or using illegal drugs at the time of her death. However, the autopsy did reveal something significant about Elisa's mental state in the days leading up to her death. The toxicology report showed traces of her prescribed psychiatric medications in her system, but at levels that were lower than they should have been. This suggested that Elisa may not have been taking her medication as prescribed in the days before her disappearance. This detail became crucial to understanding what might have happened. Elisa had been diagnosed with bipolar disorder and depression, conditions for which she was receiving treatment. Her family later confirmed that she had been prescribed medication to help manage these conditions, and that she had been doing well on her treatment regimen. But if Elisa had stopped taking her medication, or had not been taking it consistently, it could explain the erratic behavior that hotel staff had observed in the days before her disappearance. It could also explain her actions in the elevator footage, behavior that, viewed through the lens of a mental health crisis, becomes more understandable and less mysterious. The official conclusion of the investigation was that Elisa's death was an accident. The medical examiner ruled that she had drowned accidentally while experiencing a mental health episode. The theory was that, in a state of psychological distress, possibly exacerbated by not taking her medication properly, Elisa had somehow accessed the roof of the hotel and climbed into the water tank, where she subsequently drowned. But this official conclusion didn't satisfy everyone who had been following the case. Many people continued to question how Elisa could have accessed the roof and gotten into the water tank by herself. Some pointed out that the hotel claimed the roof access was locked and secured, yet Elisa had somehow gotten up there. Others questioned whether the mental health explanation was sufficient to account for all the strange circumstances surrounding her death. The elevator footage, in particular, continued to be a source of speculation and debate. While mental health professionals have pointed out that Elisa's behavior in the elevator is consistent with someone experiencing a psychotic episode or severe anxiety, others remained convinced that something more sinister had occurred. There were also questions about the hotel's handling of the situation. How had Elisa's body remained undiscovered in the water tank for nearly 3 weeks? Why hadn't the hotel staff investigated the water quality complaints sooner? Some critics argued that the Cecil Hotel's poor management and security had contributed to the tragedy. The case also highlighted broader issues about mental health, particularly the challenges faced by young people traveling alone while managing psychiatric conditions. Elisa's story became a reminder of how vulnerable people can be when they're away from their support systems and struggling with mental health issues. For Elisa's family, the conclusion of the investigation brought some closure, but also immense grief. They had lost a beloved daughter and sister in tragic circumstances, and they had to endure having her story dissected and debated by millions of strangers online. In their statements to the media, they asked for privacy and for people to remember Elisa as the bright, creative young woman she had been, not just as a mysterious case. The Cecil Hotel continued to operate after Elisa's death, though it struggled with its reputation and the notoriety the case had brought. The building has since been renovated and rebranded, but for many people, it will always be associated with the tragic story of Elisa Lam. So what can we take away from this case? Perhaps the most important lesson is that sometimes the most mysterious circumstances can have the most human explanations. Mental health is a serious issue that affects millions of people, and the stigma surrounding psychiatric conditions can prevent us from recognizing when someone is in crisis. Elisa's story reminds us to be compassionate when we encounter behavior we don't understand, and to remember that behind every mysterious case is a real person with real struggles, dreams, and people who love them. The case of Elisa Lam continues to fascinate people around the world, inspiring documentaries, books, and countless online discussions. But perhaps instead of focusing on the mystery and speculation, we should remember Elisa as she was a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, whose story ended far too soon. The elevator footage that made this case famous shows us someone in distress, someone who needed help. And while we may never know exactly what happened in those final moments, we can honor Elisa's memory by working to better understand and support those who struggle with mental health challenges. In the end, the case of Elisa Lam is not just a mystery to be solved. It's a reminder of our shared humanity and of the importance of looking out for one another, especially in our darkest moments.